I'm Mathew Garrahan. I'm the global media editor of the Financial Times. I'll be moderating proceedings tonight. I want to apologize in advance if there are any English cultural references that I miss. I've just come back to Britain after 11 years in the States, so I couldn't tell you for 1 minute who Ollie Murs is or anyone like that. So please go easy on me if there's anything that goes over my head. The title of this evening is Sail or Scale, prompted by some big media takeovers that are in the offing, going through the regulatory process. The sale of Rupert Murdoch's entertainment assets to Disney has caught all the headlines. We have the pending takeover of Sky by Fox, and then following that, Disney will hope to buy those assets. We're going to look at the implications of deals like this and of the coming dominance of global tech companies like Netflix, Amazon, Facebook, and others. So the panel, let me introduce my panel. With Mathew Horsman, who I'm sure some of you know from Mediatique, Mike Darcey, former COO of Sky and the former CEO of News International, Kate Bulkley, who's a media journalist and commentator, I'm sure a lot of you know as well. At the end, Tim Hincks, who's the co-founder of Expectation Entertainment and a former top man at Endemol Shine, who I'm sure a lot of you know as well. Now, before we start, I thought we could kick off with a quote from James Murdoch at last year's RTS conference in Cambridge, which I'm sure a lot of you attended. And he said this, he said, "Scale provides the confidence to invest strategically, take risks, and support the development of new technologies and innovation, critical attributes in this dynamic period. It's what allows us to take big creative swings and empower a diverse range of creators to tell breakthrough stories that can drive meaningful change." That sort of sets the scene for this sort of the deal frenzy we're seeing now. Companies bulking up, need to be bigger. And I mentioned Disney and Fox. There's AT&T's takeover of Time Warner, Discovery buying Scripps, all based on this idea that traditional media owners aren't big enough and don't have the wherewithal or the firepower to compete with Netflix, Amazon, and others. So does this represent a loss of nerve by traditional media companies? Have they lost their bottle? Or is it the only realistic response to the challenges posed by this new era, this new technology era that we're in? I'm going to ask Mathew to present a couple of slides with some data to show the sort of lay of the land. I think the global lay of the land too. I think a lot of the debate that I've noticed here in the UK since I've been back has been quite inward-looking and about the effect of what's happening on our doorsteps. When I think, as you'll see, the UK scene is part of a much bigger and much scarier world of media consolidation. So why don't we?
Sure. Can we put up that first slide that we put together? Now, this is a bit scary. It's a very,
Oh my gosh! Is there a quiz later, Mathew?
There is.
I've got to say, I can't read it, and I'm sitting right here. So.
I was going to say, this is a very tiny slide for really big numbers. So I'll try and take you through these big numbers.
Wow.
And also, this will be on the RTS website. So if you want, you can knock yourselves out. It's just to make two observations of two inescapable things that are going on. One is the sheer size of the new entrant, so-called new entrant companies that have come into the space that was traditionally associated with UK broadcasting, UK television. And these are really big beasts. So if you look at the first, on the left-hand side there, if you just look at Apple's revenues at the very top, right? Last year, those are, all this data, by the way, is the most recent year available. Those revenues were 3 times those of BT, Sky, Liberty Global, the BBC, ITV, and Channel 4 put together. So that, I think we can pause on that thought. That's the kind of challenge we've got.
It's worth saying for those who can't see that
Apple
is at the very top. ITV, BBC, ITV, Channel 4 among the bottom 4 with the little dots right there.
Little dots.
Yeah.
So the tiny little dots down here, Channel 4, ITV, Discovery, BBC, Liberty Global, Netflix, a mere tiddler, really.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Netflix is kind of...
Sky, CBS, Fox, Time Warner, BT, Facebook, Vodafone, Disney, Comcast, Verizon, Alphabet, Google, Amazon, Samsung, Apple. Now, all right, everyone knows that some of these people make a lot of money out of kit and manufacturing, et cetera, but we know that the competition has started to change, so that these operators are moving into each other's spaces in a way that wasn't true 20 years ago. I'm probably the oldest one on the panel. I can remember a time before TVs were smart and before phone companies would bid for football. This is where we could watch whatever we wanted to watch when we wanted to watch it. All those things were not true. And so ITV and BBC and the mainstream broadcasters would think more about each other and maybe the odd concern about the sell-through for DVDs or something, right? But they weren't thinking about all these other big issues that they currently have to think about. And the other, and I pointed just on the size thing, if you look at Netflix, it is an absolute minnow next to Apple, Amazon, and Google. And Netflix has the same revenues, that tiddler, as the BBC and ITV combined. So you can get a sense of these gradations, right? And even if Disney does buy Fox, and Fox gets full control of Sky, the resultant combination would just have the revenues half of those of Apple and on par with those of Google. So it gives you a sense of where we are. But the competition on the right-hand side is, I didn't do this, it's a Venn diagram, I don't do Venn diagrams, but I'm told that this is the theoretical limit of Venn diagrams, the most number of coefficient relationships you can put in one Venn diagram. And it just shows how complicated this world has become.
I think if the audience are clapping a diagram, we're going to be okay tonight.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I think it's going to be...
Especially that
I think it's going to be a good night.
Yeah, when did the bar open?
And as I said, in the old days, you have to worry about just yourselves, and I have to worry about everyone else as well. The revenues that traditionally have supported TV content in the UK, so subscription revenues, advertising license fee, they're all under various degrees of challenge. And the new entrants have not really, and we'll have perhaps a disagreement about this, that the new entrants have not really stepped up to the plate appreciably in the UK. It's starting, but it's not happening fully. But it has had an effect on the global market upstream for content. So if you look at the second slide, which just talks about some of the program costs, so per program here, largely per hour, of content, as high as they get down at $16 million an hour. And all the way down at the bottom, one of my favorites, Vera, this is all in US dollars now. At the very bottom is Vera at about $1 million an hour.
Get Down cancelled after one season as well, right?
Say again?
The Get Down was cancelled after one.
And indeed, that 16 million was
amazing.
during the sort of two-thirds way into the season, so they started spreading it all the way through. My only point of this is getting expensive. It wasn't that many, and please support me on this one, Tim, it wasn't that many years ago when £1 million was a very big number for an hour of UK content. That was a big number, and people thought, oh, we're going to spend $1 million on this, right? Well, now routinely these programs are costing more than that. And the other thing and I'll finish with this thought in my short 3 to 4 minutes to start, is that we've seen this trend, haven't we, with the networks saying, well, let's sort of play the game with the new entrants. If they're going to come in and spend all this money and get the talent together and become players in this market, we can work with them. Co-pro, let's do the co-pro. We'll put in a bit of money, they'll put in a lot of money, we'll retain the UK rights, we'll have a holdback, we'll have a first window, everything will be fine. And that, I think it's astonishing that was a trend which is built and built till crescendo really sort of now. I think it's already over. I think these big new entrants are now saying, how come we're giving you, there's a budget of $6 million an hour, you're spending $1 million and you're getting all the UK rights and we can't show this stuff on Netflix during the same window? I'm not sure we're going to do that again. So I think that some of these trends are really good for external suppliers, by the way, people who are making content for different parties, but maybe not so good for broadcasters going forward. And then I think I was asked to put the first slide back to leave that with you as we go on. Is that all right?
Yeah, we can all try and
make sense of it.
Make sense of the event as we go along. Okay, so let's start, before we dive into this, let's start with a big picture look. And I touched on this, but deal frenzy, deal mania going on. What are the drivers, in your view, panel, of these deals? Why are these deals happening now? Mike, what's your...
Well, everybody is talking a great deal about scale. And I think, you see just how much content is costing now to produce something that, the world thinks is the right sort of standard that they now are coming to expect.
Scale meaning the ability to serve a global market or the ability to serve an unlimited market? How?
Well, I'd sort of go back to what James said a year ago. I think you need a scale of investment across a portfolio of content ideas to be able to cope with the risk of putting that much money on the table behind a particular idea. You need quite a broad portfolio to be able to manage that. Otherwise, you are, betting a lot of money on red. To use a roulette term. Personally, I think it is one part about scale. I think another big part of the story that's going on is a re-engagement with the idea that vertical integration is a powerful thing. So I think it's the other theme that sits behind some of the deals you see. So the AT&T, Time Warners, and some of the other big consolidations that have been going on in America. Quite a lot of it is between a platform and a content provider. I mean, that is something that Sky was vertically integrated in this country right from the beginning, and found that to be a very useful construct. At times when others thought it was a bit unfashionable, it feels like it's coming back into fashion. And I think you could take James Murdoch's quote from last year, take out the word scale and write vertical integration, and the rest of it would still hold, in the sense that vertical integration can help you to manage the risk. So if you have scale in distribution, it helps you manage the risk of investing in content, because you've got distribution that can't be denied to you. You can't be held up, but vice versa as well. If you have scale in distribution, you have more confidence to invest in content, because you can
distribute it.
your platform won't be denied content, and your content won't be denied distribution.
Have the barriers to entry to vertical distribution been lowered? I mean, Netflix has no physical infrastructure, has no pipes, has no, but it has 120 million subscribers around the world.
Yeah.
It relies on others to beam its content into their living rooms, but it doesn't have a distribution infrastructure, does it?
No.
So does that?
Well, yeah. So they don't have pipes, but fortunately we have something called the internet, and so they're fine with that. But they have sort of the modern idea of a distribution platform, in the sense of a subscriber base, a bunch of people who are coming in and have already, sort of entered into a financial arrangement, in which money is deducted from their bank account every month.
Right.
So that is, in an internet world, the modern idea of a platform.
Right.
Whereas
So
if you are a content provider and you don't have one of those, you don't have 10 million, 100 million people already sitting there paying you money, then you have to go and find somebody who does have one of those and do a deal with them. But if you do have one of those, then you always know, if you invest in content, at the very least, you can distribute it to those people with whom you already have.
So it's about direct relationships with consumers?
Matthew,
I think it's a big
that's
piece
the
of it.
point. The idea is, it's sort of like, you say the barriers of entry have gone down. Yes, so a Netflix can come in and say, hey man, we don't have to build the expensive pipe network. We don't have to lay cable, or we don't have to launch satellites, or all those kind of things.
A network of trucks and engineers to come
but
in.
there's also an added benefit if you're in the pipe business, right? You can do different things with your pipes that Netflix maybe can't do with the pipe that it doesn't own. So that's another question. I think actually it's not Netflix you need to look at. It's somebody like Amazon, because they have cloud, the Amazon cloud. That's a huge part of their business. They actually control their system a lot more than a Netflix does. So when we get into net neutrality and stuff like that, that's maybe going to be an issue for them. But the idea is, the vertical integration that Mike's talking about and that we're all seeing these companies think about has to do with what do we need to control to make sure that we can actually go forward and make this a business and make it still work. And he talked about risk aversion, and that's a really big thing. But I think the other thing is it's just a very different world. As Mathew said at the top, these companies aren't in the same kind of business that traditional legacy media companies are in.
Yeah.
Traditional legacy media companies and studios want to make money on program making. Amazon doesn't care about making money on their programs that they commission. They want to sell more loo roll, right? So it's a very different business model, which I think is the really kind of scary thing.
I would say, so thinking if you're keeping it big picture at the moment, I would say from my point of view, so from a content creator, so I'm into content creation, and of course we do see, in a funny way, we do think about it as a similar business model, as in we suddenly see more customers, we see more demand for our content, right, and our IP. So
it's great days for you. If you've got, people are prices are going up. There are more buyers.
And I have been vertically integrated, Mathew, and I'm happy to say this in public. I think these days it's absolutely...
Was it a painful experience?
It's absolutely fine.
That's why he's sitting down.
Thank you. Exactly.
Just
Thank
saying.
you. And if you've seen the contract I signed when I left, then I'm duty bound to say what a wonderful experience it was. But I think it raises certain issues, right? That sort of vertical integration. and again, from my point of view, about what does it mean about creativity, and ultimately what does it mean about, and what might it mean about sort of the diversity of ideas and shows, and ultimately scale here. You know, I used to hear a lot about scale at Endemol, of course, and I'm sure I said it many times myself, but it's sort of what you sort of go to when, I mean, it's a hits business, right? So I think what we should understand is this beautiful diagram, it's beautiful. Ultimately, what's underneath all this is it's a hits business. We all define what we mean by that. That means it's got a huge amount of risk attached to it, and that means in some way you need to mitigate that risk if you're any one of these guys, whether you're Channel 4 or Apple, in some sense, you're mitigating that risk. I don't need to do that. It doesn't mean it's not extremely painful when things don't work, and of course it threatens, but ultimately I need to know there's enough people out there wanting to buy the product. And of course, in some ways, the challenge for the guys, people at the bottom here, well, particularly the PSBs, is, of course, how do they compete with that? But also, jumping ahead a bit, I think there's a really interesting trend developing. We talk about global, demand for global content, the big house of cards and so on. And of course, that is absolutely what we're seeing with these new entrants, if we can call them new entrants, the notion of big global pieces. But guess what? There's a new phenomenon happening, which is they're also spotting that actually people in Britain also quite like British content, right?
Local.
And local content. They want market share and sell toilet rolls or whatever it is they do. So they're also onto the idea that, well, we should be thinking about local content. And I think that, if I was at BBC or Channel 4, that's the thing I'd be getting really concerned about right now. Because I think what they're saying quite rightly, and Channel 4 have said it recently, is what this gives us is that we've got a niche here. We can get in here and create sort of, you know, roughly hewn, bespoke British content. Well, they're trying to do that too.
If you're Channel 4, the ad market is under pressure, right? TV ads are...
Sure.
People are watching fewer TV ads. Viewership goes up and down. Channel 4 can't even own its own programming, so it can't sell to the likes of Netflix or anyone else. So they're in a bit of a bind, aren't they?
There's different models of different platforms, but I don't think they're in a bind at all. I mean, I think they just need... I mean, so I was involved in the Black Mirror.
Right.
Okay, Black Mirror is quite an... I mean, it's probably 3 years ago now, but it's quite an interesting moment in time, right? When it happens to be Channel 4, but when a traditional broadcaster had an extraordinary piece of content, came from us, from Charlie Brooker, and suddenly Netflix wake up to the fact that this somehow fits their algorithm in some way I don't quite understand. Right?
Yeah, right.
And people
they won't tell us, but they like the numbers. They swooped in.
And they swooped in, and it was a moment because I think, you know, as well documented now, but two things: one, huge amount of money, and two, an interesting approach to the creative, right? Which was to say, do what you want, Charlie. Yeah. Do what you want. And I think that the two interesting tests there. One, you can't do a lot about, as you say, which is they can offer what they can offer money-wise. But I think there's another trend developing, which is what does it mean about the way creatives interact with broadcasters and suppliers? What is that relationship now? Because I was at, happens to be a British PSB, but it doesn't matter, it's BBC. Someone at BBC we were in a pitch the other day, and this person on the other side, a buyer, said, yeah, I don't think that's going to work. And of course we're saying, I don't know any of you who pitch, but we're saying, well, actually we think there's something in this. And they said, do you know what? I'm very, very rarely wrong. Oh. And you sort of think, I'm thinking, that's weird. Yeah. I'm thinking, that's weird, I'm wrong a lot, and I'm a lot richer than you. You must... I didn't think that. I definitely didn't think that. That literally just flew into my head, and I said it out loud. I promise you, I didn't think that. But actually...
This evening is on the record, isn't it?
Sure. But interestingly, you're sort of thinking, that's one isolated case, and whatever, I'm not making casting aspersions. But
you can go somewhere else.
But yes, I wonder where that's going to go and how that will be, you know.
And you don't even know how much they actually made at the BBC, because they could be on a personal services contract too. It's all human.
Yeah. There you go.
That's right.
Yeah. But where does Channel 4 in that gets screwed in that situation? I mean, they took the risk on Black Mirror, and off it goes, and they can't do a thing about it. They share none of the upside in the sale onwards because it's not their show and they can't own it. I just don't see, they're the ones taking the first bet.
It gets down to what we were saying before. Mathew
they become a sort of farm team for the major leagues.
The broadcasters are under pressure, Mathew, for sure. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that Channel 4 is out of the running.
Absolutely not.
And it's going to be swings and roundabouts, all of this, right? They're going to take in so much money from 3 billboards this year, which is just a home run, right? That would be 15, 20 million to the bottom line at Channel 4. And that happens every once in a while for weddings.
You can't build a business plan on the basis that that's going to happen every
year.
No,
what I'm saying is that there's money.
It's great when it does.
It does. And also, that's what I mean. There are punts all the time. I don't believe, by the way, that any of this is decided by algorithm. I think it's all decided by people. and they can talk about algorithms told us this.
Yeah.
But the actual home runs all come from people saying, that might be quite good, let's do that.
But I think what is I'm sure you're right about that, Matthew. But I think what is interesting is that somehow these guys are sort of commercializing the niche, right? That is happening. And that is threatening, I think, because I think then we're beyond the wonderful things like House of Cards or indeed The Crown. We get that. But they've also managing, aren't they, in some way to commercialise, or maybe they don't need to commercialise, because ultimately, you say it's all about toilet rolls, or whatever. But they are managing to make, to zero in on what we once would have called niche. But your point about Trevor, I mean, for all of them, as we know, it's a massive challenge how you compete in this world. As a content creator, this is genuinely very exciting. I know that other content creators are involved too, so I'm not suggesting it's not easy. It's very competitive out there, but it does feel like what an extraordinary time. And we often think about going to America, as TV creators, and we're always conflicted by America because on one level it's very transactional, and there's the whole agency system and all the rest of it. And you sort of think, gosh, so you go into a meeting and they sort of say, okay, we're interested or we're not interested. There's none of the small talk. There's none of the sort of, well, what about this? But actually, there's a little, you wonder if that's the way it's going to start to feel here, which is there's 5, 6, 7 people. I'm going to Apple tomorrow, famously, now run, or at least, from a content point of view, from someone who used to run Channel 4, and how the world has changed. And suddenly there's 5 or 6 people potentially interested, right? And that feels exciting.
So let's broaden this out to the other PSBs and to the other traditional media businesses. How do they fare? Mike, what happens to not PSB? What happens to Sky in this environment?
Well, I think everybody at Sky is wondering who's going to own them.
Yes. And who is going to own them? What's the actual bet?
Well, you just have to take it through stages. So the Fox proposal to buy the remaining shares that they don't own is well advanced through the CMA. They're at the stage of discussing behavioural remedies. I think that all surrounding Sky News, and I think the betting is that that's more likely than not to go through. But it's not a done deal till it's a done deal.
When you read what Ofcom said and you read what the CMA said, given what we're talking about here and the sort of much bigger shifts that are taking place, did the regulators get it right, or are they aware of the sort of the pressures on these businesses now with the extra competition that's coming?
Well, I think so, yes, but it's slightly tricky for the CMA because most of us looking from the outside sort of hear about the deal with Disney and think, so it doesn't really matter anymore because, surely if that deal goes through, then there's no longer a coming together of newspapers and TV news, so it doesn't really matter. But the CMA can't really do that. They have to do it in stages. They can really only analyse the transaction in front of them, and they can't say, it doesn't really matter anymore because that Disney thing's probably going to happen. Right. Because it might not happen. It probably is going to happen, but they can't assume it's going to happen and analyse the market on that basis. So they have to do what's in front of them.
That's why they're pushing on the remedy, like Sky News. Will it be still alive in 5 years? Can you protect it? All those kind of things.
5 has become 10, it would seem.
Now it's become 10. So is that enough of a remedy to make it go through? Do you think?
Well, in the past they have tended to be, sort of comfortable with those sorts of things. Yeah. But
who knows?
I don't think anybody really knows. And then there's the view of the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
I should say, by the way, that we could have asked. We were supposed to have Dame Patricia Hodgson appearing tonight, who, as you all know, is former chair of Ofcom and had to pull out, and she sends her apologies. I forgot to say that at the beginning. Mathew, what do you think happens to the regulatory roadmap going, that we're on now with Sky and with Fox?
Well,
and
on
with
that
Disney
specific,
later on?
I think there's going to be a more general series of observations you can make about the regulatory environment going forward, because things have to give a bit in terms of how media and mergers have been looked at traditionally, because you can't, I get the sensitivity of Sky News and the news stable of newspapers, I get it, but it is one channel, a news channel, losing the Murdoch empire 40, maybe million a year. And the oddest thing about all of this is that you could, at a stroke of a pen, remove the problem of plurality by closing it. Now, how can that be right?
That would be a bit perverse.
It's very perverse, and I think Ofcom said that in 2011 when we went through all this before, with the first bid. So I think we need to think about what we're going to do, and how you can have a situation where maybe 80p of every incremental new revenue advertising pound is going to one of two companies, right? Facebook and Google. At a time when we're all struggling. Well, you mentioned about the PSPs. There are basically three revenue streams for network television traditionally: subscription, license fee, advertising. And all three of those are under significant pressure. So advertising, absolutely under pressure. License fee, it'll be up to us, but it doesn't look good. And subscription, it's not growing for full fat pay TV, right? That's not growing. It's all the skinny bundles, small bits and pieces, which is lower ARPU, lower revenue than the other stuff. So I think there's all these problems, and that's the stuff that goes to funding the content that we all watch. And one of the
But
problems
did the regulators miss a trick then? Neither of them paid much heed to any of the things you just said.
Well, they are starting to, and the DCMS has recently announced an investigation to the newspaper industry, which is looking at Facebook, Google, the platforms, versus newspaper publishers, and they're looking at it in these ways, thinking about, well, what's actually happening in terms of the dynamics.
But they're bothered about plurality when it comes to
well,
the reaches of the Murdoch Company. I didn't say a word. There was no outcry at all about Trinity Mirror buying the Express.
well, and that's my point. That's starting. You're already seeing signs, aren't you, that it's just going to be much more laissez-faire about some of these, because these national champions won't be able to survive in a world that looks like that, with all those sorts of revenues coming into this marketplace. And I think this vertical integration problem, which I absolutely agree with, should be supplemented by another observation, which is it's about the returns that these companies have in their core businesses. This is Kate's point. They're silo hopping. They're going from being a retail operation, say Amazon, and then they hop over to content. And for them, it doesn't have to make money on its own terms. Right. It only has to make money if it firms up the propensity of its users to spend with Amazon. So how can you compete with that when you have to make decisions about the return on your own business?
We've seen that story play out in the UK in respect of sports rights over
Absolutely right.
over 20 years. So 20, 25 years ago, the most attractive sports rights would tend to be won by the largest freeware broadcaster who could bring the most eyeballs, make the most ad revenue. They won. Then we went through a period where a sports pay channel found that it had a business model that could outbid that model and systematically was able to take the most attractive sports rights. And then gradually it became apparent that was going to be would always be beaten by a vertically integrated pay TV business that was integrated between the sports channel and the rest of the pay proposition, so the basic channels and all the rest, because there was more margin to be generated from that. So that entity would win against a pure play sports channel. And then the most recent version of that story has been, it's been fairly clear that unless you are integrated into a triple play broadband proposition as well, and you're also able to drive margins on broadband, then you probably can't compete. And that story's played out around the world. So we've had successions of a new model that can systematically outbid the old one.
And interesting.
And the question is there another one coming down the track?
There is.
And is it loo roll?
Exactly. And what we just saw, I don't know how many people expected. There's so much coverage saying Amazon's going to bid, Netflix is going to bid, Google's going to bid.
They haven't done it yet, have they?
And you look at the results of the first round of the first bit of the tender, and it's Sky and BT. Sky and BT paying less money than they did like for like the last time, right? So it isn't yet that this new model works, because who else can monetize 10 million, 9, 10 million a game, right? Free to air can't, your point, right? Traditionally 3, maybe 3.5 million you might get from an average sized audience watching football. They can't compete with 9 or 10. But so far, Amazon and the others have not talked themselves into thinking they can either.
Well, either that or they're just not quite ready to make that step.
Or they don't like the packages that are left. I mean, look at Facebook in India. They did a bid for Indian cricket, and they said, hey, we would like this, but they didn't bid enough. And Star India said, no way we're letting you anywhere near this. We'll up the bid and we'll keep you out.
And they had enough.
They were very clear. They wanted that to help grow their Indian market, because in India, Facebook sees a huge potential.
It would make no sense for Amazon to spend $5 billion to get into the UK domestic football market. Doesn't make any sense.
Do you expect, are you banking on a tech player owning football rights in some form in this country in the next?
Well, I was expecting Amazon to bid something. And when they didn't come in the first round, the ones that have gone, I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. Does that mean that it was too rich? Sort of like what Mathew was saying, or do they really want to spend that kind of money for this market at this time? This is a very competitive market. We all know that. It's different than some of these other markets around the world. But if anyone was going to come in, I thought it was going to be Amazon.
Right.
Will they buy one of these other packages? I don't know. I mean, they're not great packages. I mean, it seems to me probably BT or Sky will end up with them. Obviously,
they're pretty poor packages.
they're pretty poor packages. So they're going to be low. They're going to be, says the gunman who knows.
That's the legacy, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think we will start to see that, because I think that it comes back to Tim's point that they're starting to be more local. And these big giants, you know, first they did the global thing, right? It was all about global.
Which I think will still be absolutely
and
central,
they'll still
right?
do that. But, you know, when you get into some of these individual markets, they're going to start doing local commissioning. I mean, what's the one that just happened last week? It was Virgin Media and Amazon are doing something called The Feed, which is some sci-fi thing. And that, it's interesting. Virgin gets the
I'm glad you
UK
didn't
rights.
pitch it, Kate. You made it sound quite dull.
No.
I'm sure it's fantastic.
That's why I'm not in your
Some
job.
sci-fi thing. Yeah.
Some sci-fi.
Yeah, yeah.
It's, you know, set in the near future. It's very exciting.
Very
Anyway,
good. I'm in.
David Boucher will kill me. All right. So, but the point is that you know, they've done this, and Amazon has said, as long as we get the rights in the markets that we want, we will let you, Virgin, have your rights here in the UK. We'll let you, Virgin, owned by Liberty Global, have your rights in the markets that you want the rights in, and it'll be fine. That's much more of a localization strategy than all
I think
rights
there's a clue
everywhere.
to your answer for the UK, because I think, just to get slightly away from Lou Roll, if you say what Amazon are trying to do
They're
is
a
sort of
retailer.
grow subscribers to Amazon Prime, you know, they probably don't need to spend $5 billion on football in the UK in order to
the point.
grow
To do that.
subscribers of Amazon Prime. You know, that's probably pretty penetrated already. And to the extent that there are some people left, is there anyone in the room who doesn't have a subscription to Amazon Prime? I don't know. There are probably much
by
cheaper
show of
and more
hands.
focused ways.
There's a few over here.
Who?
Not many.
Sorry, is this does or doesn't?
Hands up if you don't have a subscription to Amazon Prime.
Ooh, good.
Okay, so
And hands up if you do have a subscription to Netflix. There you go. Carried.
You have several
think
Simon.
there are-
Simon already has several.
there are
subscriptions to Netflix.
probably cheaper ways and more targeted ways to try and grow the subscriptions to Amazon Prime than spending $5 billion on football.
So did the Premier League miss a trick by splitting its rights up in the way that it did into lots and lots of pieces and localizing the sale in the way that they have done for the last 20 years?
Well, they certainly changed the packaging, and I guess what it's hard. Certainly, they're struggling to sell the last two packs. It would appear that, you know, they run an auction, and to the extent that they have received bids for those packs, they're not happy with the level of the bid, so they remain unsold. I think the question we don't really know the answer to is, did they know all along that there was going to be a problem with these, and did they have little choice because that is what Ofcom required of them? I mean, what has happened is there's been an increase in the total number of games being sold. The problem is that historically, every new game, you had to find a new slot within the year to play it out. We appear to have broadly reached the limit of slots that are available.
Saturation, yeah.
So the only way to get from 168 to 200 is to accept that there's now going to be some periods where we're going to have multiple games shown, so 10. And so the packs that are unsold are, so one of the packs has 20 games in it, but it's only over 2 slots.
Right. 2 days a year.
Yeah. So 2 days a year. So that doesn't sound like a really strong basis
No.
for a subscription.
There's no narrative for the year, is there?
No. You've got 2 90-minute periods.
So were the league
in which
hoping
you've
that a
got-
tech company would use it as a test to see, dip their toe in the water? Why would they?
Well, I'm not
Why
sure
would they
it
put
was
such an attractive
particularly
package on offer?
well because I don't think they saw too many other ways to get. They were under a lot of pressure to increase from 168 games
Right.
to 200. The only way they felt they could do that is to have simultaneous games. And the
that
problem
helps
is
the tech.
they may have thought about these as, gee, it's 20 games in this pack,
Yeah.
10 million a game, gee, that's 200 million. But if the alternative analysis is it's 2 slots, 2 10s are 20, if they had in their mind they were going to get something like 150, 200 million out of this, and they're seeing bids of 20 to 30, that's a bit disappointing. That I would suggest is roughly why they're not.
Can I just I just want to talk about happiness for a minute, because that went down very well. Let's have a little moment of silence for happiness. Because this wonderful chart, what these guys are up to, ultimately content television makes you happy, right? Or stimulates, or informs, and famously educates and entertains. So where might that be going, that story? Because actually it's been a pretty good story so far, and actually you can make a strong argument that the boom in drama, which ultimately, when people think about television at the moment, they sort of think about drama, right, in shorthand. Partly because television is run by snobs, and partly because there has been an incredible, boom in the quantity of drama, and those budgets that you show. Oh, well, no, not those, but the hourly budgets, that you talked about are sort of interesting in a slightly tabloid. Gosh, how much money? But they also reflect quality, right? What we know is that there is some correlation.
Maybe not the Get Down.
Maybe not the Get Down. We can agree on that. But I think Game of Thrones,
The Crown
or Game of Thrones, I think are only
You do get more
exist.
for your money.
Yeah, you get more for your money, and the money is on screen, isn't it? As well as in Andy Harry's pocket. So, and what fine pockets they are.
Yeah.
Very deep. Yeah. I don't know what that means, Mathew.
Large.
Right. Give him a glass of water and calm him down.
That would have been, no, sorry.
But that story's been a good story, right? Again, from a let's say a user, consumer, viewer kind of point of view. This point about so where do we go as they start to sort of do it on their own? I think is and in particular with Netflix and Amazon, but also we're seeing, I in common with probably many people in this room, engaged with YouTube now, YouTube Red and so on, who are looking at long form content and of course the Amazons and Netflix and so on. So where might that be going? And I think what we're beginning to see is that they just want to do it on their own. And that it was Jane Featherstone who pointed out recently at the BAFTA, that other organisations are available, BAFTA exists as well as the RTS, and pointed out that this co-production kind of dream that we've all been living is the tap is running dry, or you can run an argument that is
Short-lived as well.
It's an interim step.
It's an interim step. It's an interim step, and actually it's a bit like, it's not remotely as cynical as this, but can you just show us how it's done? Great, thanks for that. Right, we're now going to do it.
Now we're going to eat your lunch.
Right, and so you can then run an argument which says, what does that mean? Does that mean
Less happiness for broadcasters.
less happiness, less exciting content, less nuanced? That was Jane's argument, that it would be less nuanced. I'm not sure that, but there's an argument you can run. And I think there's another really big point, going back to what you said about Channel 4, but let's say for all the PSBs that we care about in this room, I suspect, is that how do they compete with talent? Because the inflation we're seeing right now for talent is extraordinary, and is going way beyond what away from the world of co-production, what these broadcasters
Is it
can
sustainable?
sustain. It can't be sustainable, right? There are already shows, dramas that BBC dramas that are effectively 80% funded elsewhere,
Right.
if you know what I mean.
Well, Collateral are funded with Netflix, and
What was?
the
Yeah.
David
No,
Harris
exactly.
thing,
No, and there's multiple examples, and that's a very happy relationship right now. Obviously
now.
there's also, but it's not going to last.
And
Right?
it can't last because they will not consider, the new entrants, if I can call them that, will not continue to cede these big exclusive periods and holdbacks to their domestic partner. The domestic partner won't be able to play that game. I should point out the orders of magnitude, just for a second, to keep this in mind, right? The total online income, says Ofcom last year, was about $1 billion, a short billion, 900 million. That includes digital download to own, SVOD, everything. Everything's in that billion, which is a big number, and it's certainly big if it used to be zero, right? So that's a big number. But remember that it's still roughly 4 billion of NAR, of advertising revenues in TV in this country. And I know there are weaknesses, we've seen them, but it's a much bigger number. The real question, and of the 4 billion that advertisers spend on television, how much of that floats down to making content? That's the real question.
Right.
And how much of the 900 million floats down to make content in this country? Not to mention the billions that are made globally by these big operators, but that doesn't flow down, does it, in terms of the cost of content to this country? We're better off than most because we're on the wonderful axis of talent between LA, New York, and London. So we're kind of part of it. Even with Brexit, we're still part of that, and we'll continue to be part of that. So we've done rather better than some other countries. But this is going to have a chilling effect, this talent escalation, this cost escalation, and this localization, as you say. And I suspect the localization will not give us the breadth of content that we currently enjoy as a PSB nation.
I think it can't, and I think the challenge, therefore, for those PSBs is how they leverage that. And I've been on panels when I was at Endemol and Endemol Shine, when but arguing with David Abraham, CEO of Channel 4 at the time, where he about this vertical integration, about the sort of Americanization of independent production companies and the format farms or whatever he called them. And at the time, I strongly disagreed. Weirdly, that also coincided with the fact I was running one of them.
Yes.
But I'm a man of principle, and I haven't changed my mind. But I merely stress, and I should say, a statement of fact and record. The BBC are a minority shareholder in the company I've formed a piece of. But argument or question: should the BBC only commission British content from British companies? Now, I'm already going to answer that. That's a bit extreme, but you can imagine that might be part of the way the thinking begins and starts as to how do you find your point of difference, and ultimately, BBC's case, in 7 years, whatever it is, how do you then start saying this is how the license fee works, right? This is why we have it and so on.
And of course, as soon as you say license fee, that's the key, right? It's one thing to say to RTV, sort of do what you like, keeping up your very limited license obligations currently, and then go on and make profits and pay dividends. But the BBC is in the privileged position of receiving all that money every year, guaranteed, and maybe it does people look askance if it's going to spend it on yet another sci-fi programming joint venture with Netflix.
Is there too much? I mean, John Landgraf, famously said, "There's too much out there. There's more great TV being made for the hours around the day and the eyeballs around the world." The number of scripted dramas in production in the US went from something like 40 or 50 5 years ago to 450. So it was a huge jump. And his point was, it's all being commissioned, it's all being produced, but a lot of it's going to go unwatched. And
I don't.
But what is
I
this
don't believe
concept
that.
of too much? Is it?
What's too much?
Is it too much music?
Is it too much in the
Are there
sense
too many
that
panels discussing Netflix? No, look at it. This is not possible. They can't have enough of them.
Yeah, this whole idea
Maybe
of
one
peak
too many.
drama, that's crazy. If there's an appetite for it, if the platformers want to commission it, it's going to continue to go up.
I mean,
And
unless he
the
thinks
more-
he's saying, it is unsustainable and will come back from 450 back to 50, or maybe we'll settle somewhere in the middle.
I mean, some of them will fail, right? Some of them won't work, and then they
There's
won't
a
get
lot of money
recommissioned.
chasing talent, and
See
not
the
all the
music
talent
industry.
is worth it.
Exactly.
By the way, of course, that's a product of a mind, perhaps, that's thinking of a scheduled world, right?
Right.
In digital, I mean, what
This
is too
isn't a
much?
scheduled world.
It all exists. So as you say, I mean, if you go onto Netflix, as you all do, or most of you do, from that show of hands, not everyone, the churn is quite significant, right? And we can name, just as with any broadcaster or any production company, you can name the 2-3 sort of big shows, and then there's just a whole bunch of other stuff. And it's exactly like in the 80s, which you may remember, Mathew. Yeah. You remember going to Blockbusters at the video shop, and you spend like
With
an
relish.
hour, and you go back to buying 24, Eddie Murphy and
Right.
24, you have the same thing every other week, right? Because ultimately it's great, something right comforting about seeing millions of
And
possibilities.
yet they
but
keep churning
other-
this stuff out.
And they keep doing it.
They
and
never said there's too much.
Right, and so I think that from in an unscheduled world, on-demand world, it's sort of a meaningless statement, right, on one level. But it's working for them.
But I was worried about what is being made. It's not, I mean, I agree completely with that, and I think there's lots
That's
of
good.
opportunities
That's all I
for
needed
you.
to know, Matthew.
But I wonder if we're making enough of all the stuff we want to have made. If the models for the sustainability of certain kinds of content funding are there when it comes to...
Well, maybe that's where regulation needs to come in some way, shape, or form. And in other words, if governments want to protect a certain kind of broadcasting in their country, maybe they have to say, you do have to produce a certain amount of stuff that's local. Because it's sort of the apocalypse is that, everything becomes a global, like Euro pudding. We used to say Euro pudding when
Yes,
it was
yeah.
co-productions,
Yeah.
right? When you had to have a little Spanish and a little Italian, a little French to make the thing work, and it all just came out as Euro pudding, and it wasn't very good.
Came out as, what was that show? Does El Dorado?
El Dorado,
Yes.
yes.
Well, I don't think that was Europe. That was a British show.
That- yeah.
just as a bit
That was a homegrown failure.
We're proud of those. We like those British. You're doing down Britain by saying El Dorado was no good. Don't do that. Yeah, they did. But I
You
tell
haven't gone
Go back to
well.
America.
I remember that.
what is more unsustainable, if that's a phrase, what is unsustainable is the sort of Stella Artois approach to programming, the reassuringly expensive approach,
Yes,
which is
right.
you say, we quite like this, but is it expensive? Oh, no, it's definitely expensive. Terrific. Great. We'll take it. But there is a sort of feeling at the moment that that's, it's got the biggest stars, it's got the biggest budget, it's good. We're okay with that, and we're comfortable. That is unsustainable, right? Some people are going to go down.
You would have thought so.
You would think, right? Yeah.
I also think it's interesting about the talent. I mean, I'd be interested to get your view. Like Ryan Murphy.
Yes, I was going to mention that.
The Ryan Murphy thing. $300
$300
million?
million, yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of money to tie him up, to take him away from the usual suspects, then tie him into Netflix.
Yeah, or
Shonda
Shonda
Rhimes
is another.
the other one. I mean, these are
Shonda Rhimes-
proven. They know how to make hits. They are
Yeah,
hit
she
makers.
sustained a television network, right? She sustained ABC
Right.
with. But
So if you tie those guys up with the new guys, what happens then? I mean, I think that's actually more worrying in a way because, as you say, the pressure on the talent is huge now. There's such an appetite for content. There's only so many people that we have to write, to direct, to produce,
Yes.
And
to
there are,
show run.
there are bottlenecks now, right? People waiting in queues to get the line producer, the showrunner that they want.
But that's why I think it's genuinely it's sort of the best time for a while for new talent, right? Because at some point, I mean, stuff needs to get made, and these people are being tied up, and actually, it's a great time if your remit, if you like. This is where I think for Channel 4, and Alex would speak much more authoritatively than me, but for BBC's Channel 4's, this is a great time to have a remit, which is partly about discovering the new
talent.
and the promotion of new talent.
We're closer to the talent, right? I mean,
You're closer to it, but also you ultimately look, as we're saying, you can't compete, show for show against these guys. And I think there's a real opportunity for new talent and people. There's a lot of sort of talent scouting at theatres right at the moment, right? More than there has been for some time. People going in to see who are the new writers, who are the new performers. That's happening quite a lot now. And that's a kind of a product, I think, of thinking, look, of course we want it written by Shonda or whoever. She's not, well, in Shonda's case, if it's not Netflix, no good, but they're just busy, right? They're doing things 3 years out.
Right. So with that in mind, does that mean that the deals that we're talking about when we started this conversation are missing a trick? I mean, there's an executive at Fox, Dana Walden, who's known internally as the Ryan Whisperer, because she's the executive who has the relationship, or had the relationship with Ryan Murphy. They really wanted her at ABC. She was part of one of the talent they wanted to import as part of the Disney acquisition of the Fox assets. And then Netflix writes a check. They don't have to buy a company. They buy Ryan. Are we going to see more of that? More direct
I think
deals
we're
with
going to see more of that, definitely, which is, I think, a very scary thing for the legacy media companies that depend on talent like that.
Right.
And that's where we go back to Mathew's chart. These guys have very deep pockets, right? And they can, I mean, they've got money. They're writing huge checks. Why did Andy Harris do The Crown with Netflix? It was a huge check.
I think these guys at the top, Apple, Amazon, etc., do have the money, and Apple and Google are ones to watch. Amazon for sure, I agree with Kate that Amazon's really the one to watch. Netflix, I'm not so sure, does have a sustainable cash pile.
Yeah,
that's
because
gonna go on and
because
on.
in the end, it's not about having the money unless you think they're irrational. The question is, do they have the business model?
Exactly, and I'm not sure
Because
they all
look, you can
Yeah,
splash some
Netflix
cash
doesn't
for a while,
Yeah.
but in the end, you've got shareholders. It's got to sort of work.
Yeah.
It's got to,
Although-
show
yeah,
a return.
although
You can
tell that
throw
to
some money
Virgin
around to
Media.
get established.
That's been years.
But if you want to play this game, indefinitely, then you need a business model that makes this work. So I think the real question is, do these new guys have a new model which allows them systematically to spend more on content than the old one?
And do it over and
And
over again.
I think the
Yes.
jury's still out on that.
I think it's out on the Netflix model where cash burn, and I mean the only way that keeps going is they can get more debt in and more and do equity swaps.
And
I mean,
their share price keeps going up.
And that game, unless people are completely irrational for the rest of all time, that game has to stop.
Yes, but I said it was going to stop 6 months ago, and it hasn't stopped yet. And the recent results, I'm sure you covered.
Yeah.
They came out. They said, "Oh, we did the price increase. We told the analysts that everything was going to go down." Didn't happen. Subscriptions went up, even though if the price increase. Stock went up. Everything went up. Oh, they're going to spend a little money on marketing now. That was the only big change. Oh, really? Going to spend some money on marketing? Wow, Netflix, great. But I mean, it is an unsustainable business model. But for the moment, it's being sustained by the irrational exuberance of the market.
What about what's happening elsewhere in Europe? We've talked a lot about US tech giants coming to the UK.
Well, I think there are two things that are happening. One, in the States, we're seeing sort of the big telcos getting involved in media and wanting, like the AT&Ts, wanting to buy the Time Warners. Verizon bought Yahoo, they bought AOL, they bought HuffPo. They were trying to get into the media space. In Europe, we've seen Vivendi make a lot of moves in that direction. So they've tried to, as a media company, they've tried to hook up with Telefonica. They've tried to hook up with the Telecom Italia. They've tried to sort of figure out how to get a big infrastructure player in the house. They have Canal Plus, but they wanted to get a bigger one, and particularly a telco, particularly a mobile operator somehow involved in their business, so they could have that distribution bit that you were talking about to make themselves more vertically integrated. We saw just 2 weeks ago with TDC, which is the big Danish telco. They had this merger all sort of signed up with Modern Times Group, which is obviously makes a lot of entertainment. They have a lot of channels. They do a lot of production companies. They had the nice production company. And they did this big announcement. I mean, it was streamed on the web. They did, it was all this done, blah, blah. Suddenly 24 hours later, they said, oh, actually, we don't think this is the deal we want. And Macquarie comes in, which is an infrastructure operator, a couple of pension funds, and they say, we'll give you a little bit more money. Suddenly, the MTG is out the window. So I think that...
And Vodafone and Liberty.
Yeah, and Vodafone and Liberty, and they've been back and forth and back and forth. I think there'll be some asset trading there, but we don't know exactly how this is going to work out. They've done it in Holland. They've done it in Germany. They'd like to do it in other places. Will it work or not? I think that the jury's out on whether those work.
Do you think there's a concept of European scale? Or is it just the agglomeration of a series of national scales? I think there's a concept. I mean, Sky's the one that's tried to do that with the Sky. We've got Sky UK, Sky. But I mean, on the content side, is there a concept of a sort of European content scale story worth going after?
Yeah, that's hard. You're getting into co-production
stuff. There's UK scale,
stuff.
There's French scale, there's Italian scale.
Yeah. Well, I think Vivendi was trying to go cross-border, but you might have a different view.
There were big plays that had lots of activities in different European jurisdictions.
Yeah.
Yes?
I can think of one.
Yeah.
I can think of it too, Mathew. Should we tell them? Or?
I thought you might want to say something about that. No, I'm just saying that
you
they
mean
have...
You mean Endemol
Shine?
Endemol Shine?
But I think the thing about... But the thing... again, it's sort of looking at it the other way around, because the story of Endemol was about yes, ultimately a company with scale, but it got scale entirely through its local activities and by making local content, so Big Brother was made in a number of, famously, or maybe not that famously, but when, after it had been out in Holland and Spain, we looked at it and said, my God, this is extraordinary, this thing. They all seem to have sex with each other. I wonder what it would be like in Britain. Turns out much the same, Mathew, to be honest. But it took them 5 series to do that. But ultimately, so you had this pan-territory content, right? But it was made locally. In a funny way, you could argue the mistakes in companies like Endemol, not Endemol itself, would be in thinking that this is again a slightly different thing, but about the centralisation of companies like that, of those consolidated, vertically integrated. You make a mistake if you think power's in the centre. It's not. And this is going back to James's comments about scale. And as we can see from this chart, scale is definitely relative, right? But ultimately, I always thought that it's not about scale. I mean, it might be, it might not be. It might be there, it might not be there. But scale isn't what creates hits and isn't what tells stories. People do, producers do, Shonda does, Andy does, whatever. That's what does it. The real question for all of these people is where are they going to find a home? Where do they feel most comfortable? Where is the most attractive place to be? At a certain point in time, for some people, somewhere like Endemol was incredibly attractive. It was a place that created a new genre of programming. Couldn't be anywhere more exciting to be. All these empires come and go, right? So where do creative people find? Where are they finding a home? Where does it feel that they can get their idea, their baby, in front of as many eyeballs as possible? And I think that's part of what this competition is about, and that's in a way the Black Mirror example.
Do you think Disney will keep Shine Endemol when they do this? They finish this deal? Does it
Who
make
knows?
sense?
I suspect. I have nothing, genuinely nothing but positive things to say about the company I was at for many, many years. I don't think any of them would think they're near the top of that list at the moment. I think, honestly, and that, by the way, is probably not a bad place to be. Yeah. So we particularly want to be at the top of that list. Right. So, who knows? But I think that company is at its heart a content creation, IP creating company, and it will always be in good shape as long as people aren't stupid about it, because it's a place where creative people feel at home and want to create things, right? And that's the point. That's what the fight is over, or what's part of what the fight is.
Okay, before anyone talks, says anything else, I want to open it up to the audience, as we're on a limited clock, and if anyone has a question, stick your hand up. Don't throw any microphones around. Are there? Oh, there are over there at the back. So there's one over here. So that's a bit much, isn't it?
That's right.
Oh, look, there are people out there.
There's people out there.
Yeah.
Hi, Daniel Toole. I'm going to ask this question in a personal capacity. You started the debate by saying kind of scale, and then Mike put in vertical integration. I wonder if you could go back to the likely Fox-Disney merger and just comment on, that entity has film studio, probably twice as big as anybody else, has TV distribution, has production, has merchandising, is international. I think it's going to be 4 to 8 times bigger than the next biggest player. If you're them, you're a machine of printing money. What will they do differently? And if you're not them, responding to that change in the landscape, how do you play? How do you play now when you don't have all those assets?
Who's up?
Why don't you go first?
Yeah, I guess. So one of the questions I'm not quite sure about the Disney Fox thing is to go back to the scale and vertical integration point. Is it just a scale play? Is it just fundamentally they see the opportunity to grow scale in the content side of the business, or is it also a vertical integration story and they see the other assets coming in like the Skies, like Star, and these other distribution platforms around the world? Are they actually seeing that as a positive and something that they want to do something with, do more with, or is that just something that they sort of have to take because it's tidy? And the bits that they really want are just the content scale in the US. And
But
to be honest, I don't really know the answer to that.
If their plan is to launch a sort of Netflix competitor, which it is, and they need scale in their own content, they want to own their own content the way Netflix does, and they need points of contact, don't they, around the world.
Yeah, I agree with you, Matthew.
So you would tend to think that the distribution platforms in the various places would bring some benefit.
Yeah, because
that they would tend to give you routes to market, and whether you see them as the prime routes to market or whether they're just risk reducers, because you think, well, at the very least, I can get my content distributed on my own platforms, and that gives me a lot better negotiating position when I'm talking to other platforms.
But it's not a forever answer, because it really feels quite interim if you're going to rely on satellite and cable platforms to distribute. Very important today, don't get me wrong, old-fashioned chap me, but the direction of travel is pretty clear.
Which is why they're getting into OTT.
But it may be that OTT is the new story.
Which is why they're doing the BAMTech deal. You know, they bought BAMTech, and basically BAMTech is a platform for OTT distribution. They wanted to do a Netflix. They didn't want to be hostage to an Amazon or Netflix to do their own OTT platform. So I think Disney gets it that they need to do that. And like Discovery gets it that they need to do that. That's why they bought Eurosport and are making an app and doing over the top. And if you looked at what's happened with the Olympics, the Winter Olympics, Discovery's done some very interesting things in how they've been distributing that content on different OTT platforms, not just on broadcast platforms.
Yeah,
so
and
I
they
think
may
I think Disney does get it. I don't think it's. I agree with you. I think probably their first focus is, wow, look at all this great content. We know how to do this. Because that's their muscle. They know how to work.
Yeah, that's where they
right?
start. But I'm sure they're asking these questions as well.
Do you think they need, given the future seems to be increasingly over the top, do they need to maintain Sky's satellite system? I mean, they've got 25 million customers, whatever it is, or 29 across Europe.
I think you maintain it, as long as it
works.
Makes you money, and it probably continues to make money for quite a long time. But I suspect they are equally interested in Now TV as an OTT platform and the position it occupies in the UK, but also the potential to take that basic infrastructure and combine it with their expanded pool of content and ask themselves, well, what would you do with that around the rest of the continent of Europe?
Right.
And look at the technology they're going to get from Sky, because Sky's been a pioneer in a lot of this really cool technology. I mean, look, the Sky Q box now has voice activation. How many people have a Sky Q box where you can talk to the damn box? Well, it's out there. There's 1 million of them out there in the UK now. So you can actually use voice to search, to discover content. That's interesting. If that gets part of the Disney Fox deal, they can scale that a lot faster across Europe.
Okay, any other questions? Anyone else? I have one over here.
I'm Alex from Broadcast. Maybe I'm missing something. I'm not quite understanding what you mean by vertical integration, but am I wrong in saying that out of the Apples, the Samsung, the Amazon, all the top guys, they haven't actually got, outside of these one-off talent deals, as it were, these very relatively small-scale talents, they're not buying content companies, content creators. Is that something that you anticipate happening, and vertical integrated in the sense that they've got that platform and that content producer engine room? Or am I not quite understanding
I think the vertical integration story is more about the old guys.
And just to make that point about silo hopping, I don't know about integration per se and buying independent production companies.
Hopping.
Sorry,
You have that on the brain.
I literally thought that's what you said. I don't
Pull
remember
yourself
that bit.
together.
Carry on, Matthew.
Sorry.
How deep is that pocket?
Silo hopping.
Right.
The idea that you've got a business that works, and it's a very big business making handsets and or TV sets, etc., and you start spending on content to support that, but you're really moving from a silo where you understand and you operate to one that you don't have to be, the content holder. You're just you're securing content in that regard. So that's why I added not so much about integration vertically, so much as hopping into an adjacent area and taking advantage of that.
And I think that's the point. Ultimately, or at the moment, the point is that's kind of what the old guard seem to be doing, or however you want to call them, as you say, Mike. I think it's a really interesting question, though, because knowing I'm quite close personal terms with someone who had to do a fundraise about a year ago to set up a small independent company, and obviously they might have sort of been interested in that question, and I think certainly at that point it was clear that just was not part of any of their strategies. In a way, why wouldn't it be at some point, right? I mean, that's all one can fret. That's what's behind your question, right? Why? Well, exactly. But also, why wouldn't they be thinking about they want to get close to content.
They buy production companies.
Right, they're doing deals, as you say, isolated deals at the moment, absolutely right. These are, with the Shondas and so on. Well, it's not a big step to say we've now actually gone in, gone in and bought a company and I think that'll be coming, right? Why wouldn't that be coming? It just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, it hasn't happened yet.
It's
It's like
happened
ITV
before.
bought them all, and now now they're thinking, well, why wouldn't Apple start buying independent production companies? Why wouldn't Apple come and bid for your company?
What do you all expect Apple to do? We haven't really mentioned them, but they've got $1 billion to spend.
I think one of the really interesting things is, which Mathew touched on, again from my sort of fence, if you like, is that what you've tended to find is in the excitement of these new entrants and so on, is that it is indeed exciting, but one of the sort of phenomena of it is the power is in the US, right? And I'm not suggesting for a minute that it won't remain. So in other words, they're global companies, but basically they're in the US, right? And that has all the attendant issues for British creatives, right? Which is it's a long way away, and of course it's a well-trodden route to go to LA and so on. But you've tended to find there's decisions being made in America. The J move is interesting, isn't it? Because there you've got someone with an absolutely cast iron, solid gold track record in finding hits and commissioning content in the UK, who's now based in just up the road, and who has, as we understand it, a very big budget.
But Tim Cook has said we don't want any violence, no blood, no nipples, and he said some words to that effect. You know, they want to be on brand and they want to be.
Yeah, I've had some bad notes in my time.
Well,
for
exactly.
shows.
So how's Jay going to,
Most of what we did at Endemol ruled out then.
Yeah, from the start.
Do more Bake Off. More Bake Off.
But
Cakes!
But this is, this is a serious point. This is a tech person, doesn't really know anything about TV, but setting the parameters.
well, they know enough to hire Jay, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, that's the point. They've hired a really serious player in this territory.
That's right.
And Zach and Jamie, who have as it were, a creative track record. So, I mean, right, but I mean, I've worked with people who had, no idea about creating content, or very good at other things, and shareholders. So I don't think that's an issue at all. I think what's interesting is not just that they're hiring interesting creative people, but for those of us in this room, that they're based here. And that's going to be fascinating. So I'm actually going to Apple tomorrow to find out exactly what they're looking for. But again, it comes to the heart of it, doesn't it? Will it be British content? What do we mean by British content?
Will it be global?
It'll certainly be.
International?
Yeah, if you go to the reception,
Mid-Atlantic.
as some of you will have done, go to Netflix reception in LA. Right, it's like genuinely one of the most exciting receptions in the world because it's showing lots of your favourite shows, and it's the only reception I've been to. I'm taking pictures for my kids, who were not that interested when I brought them back, if I'm honest. But I was jet lagged and feeling a bit emotional, and I just thought they might enjoy it. But, let's leave my kids out of it. The relationship's very strong. But it's a very exciting reception. But also, literally everyone in there is British. It's like going to bloody Edinburgh or the RTS conference. And that's great and exciting, but wow, if they're here and they're commissioning here and there's power here.
So do you think, Nick, it's a good thing that the UK market is sort of so culturally close to the US market? Because I'm also doing some work in TV markets that are further away, so like to take perhaps the extreme, the Middle East. So they don't get some of the benefits that you're talking about in terms of opportunity, but they're also rather more insulated from the risk of the American global lot coming in and doing local Arabic content as well. Sure. They're more likely to have that bit for themselves for quite a long time, and maybe indefinitely.
Yeah, no, look, I
so there seem to be positives and negatives here from how close we are to the US. Do you think it's net
Definitely.
good
I
or
think,
net
I think
bad?
it depends who you are. I think net positive if you create
If you
IP.
create content.
No
Yeah.
question about that. Because actually it's becoming, I think, less about is that a global idea or not, but sort of actually partly the form of it, how you're making it, how authored is it, who is authoring it, what's the subject area, and also, as we know, they're looking for market share just as any of the broadcasters are here. And actually that is going to entail not just great big epic, right? The Crown, wonderful, but there aren't that many Crowns you can do, and you also need the more focused, let's say, niche content. So I think absolutely net positive as a creator. If you're a public service broadcaster, well, it's more challenging, right, as we've discussed. No question about that.
I think there's absolutely an advantage, the English language for a start, but I think there really is a sort of supply of content coming out of the US that in British TV terms has worked very well in terms of the dramas and things that have come in. So don't get me wrong, when I say they haven't put a lot of money yet into the UK, which I think is true on a relative basis, everything they spend is for us, really.
That's
right?
my
Because
point, really. And that's
we're English
true
speaking.
to a lesser degree in other places.
So I was amplifying that point. I think that we all, not maybe not everyone, but we like our Stranger Things or we used to like House of Cards. And all those things are part of our fulfill our appetites as British, some of us transplanted consumers here. So I think it is a different thing, isn't it? And then I think it's easier, isn't it, for these global players to come into the domestic drama market to a degree, domestic high-end factual, I think.
Yep.
A little bit of kids, which we're seeing. But that's about it. That's my view. That I don't think it's easy to get deeper down into the wide breadth of the content that's being.
But there's not a more Europeanization thing going on. One of the things that struck me about being back and watching Sky Atlantic, a lot of shows that are coming from other Sky operations, Gomorrah and the Berlin show, which is doing quite. I mean, that Netflix is doing the same thing with local language programming.
Sure,
you
absolutely.
can discover wherever you are and get into it. Is that
Well,
not-
and HBO is starting to do it too now, which is
Right.
very interesting because they never used to do any European at all. And what's this? The Elena Ferrante
Right.
novel, I think that they're going to do, and HBO is
Right.
co-producing, and that's really interesting in Italian
Yeah.
as
and-
opposed to in English.
And by the way, there's another, to Mathew, to your point, you're absolutely right in the genres you describe. But what they're all doing now is thinking about what does non-scripted mean. How do we do non-scripted? Netflix in particular are, thinking what does entertainment mean? They've had a couple of shows that they've done that look, if you like what we, big sort of Saturday night entertainment pieces.
Yeah.
And it's definitely much harder. And, as we know, drama or scripted tends to have a much longer tail. It always has done. It's always shifted more DVDs than the reality shows and so on. So it's harder to get your head around. But the economics are much more favourable. Doesn't cost anything like as much, and they're moving into that space as well. So again, if we, as you say, if it's in the same if it's in our language, then it's got to be at least for the short to medium
What's
term.
language and sort of cultural proximity
Yes.
as well?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Everyone on that.
One thing you alluded to with the discussion of algorithms, sorry, Richard Olahead, one thing you alluded to in the discussion of algorithms but didn't really go on to is some of the kind of data advantages of owning your own distribution. I think Sky have kind of gestured towards it briefly with Sky Q and some of the advertising pickup they can get from that. Do you think that's part of kind of what helps Netflix in terms of understanding its customer base? Or is it still some kind of nice person scratching their head in an office around here that determines whether something's going to work or
So
not?
is your question that are the broadcasters or the Skies using data better or thinking about data more proactively, and that will be a positive?
And more as well, if you're a content producer, do you need that distribution to actually understand in depth and granularity what your customers and your consumers are up
Well,
to?
since Netflix doesn't tell us much, right? I mean, I think it's all good. I mean, what was it YouView announced this week that they now can look at 3 million homes through the set-top box, and they can tell you all kinds of things about how people are acting. same way that Sky can tell you all kinds of things about how people are acting watching their content. And we've seen Channel 4 move into this in a big way. How many subscribers do they have now to their registered users? I don't know, 12 million or something like that. ITV's up there in the same area. I think data is very important. I think that it's not, as we've said, it's not everything. And, you know, commissioning by algorithm is probably not the way to go. But certainly for the advertising business, and certainly for things about, you know, what do you schedule when, or when, you know, all those kind of things that are still going to exist, because we still have a big linear world we have to deal with. It's not all on demand yet, right?
In fact,
That
80% of
data
it
you
is still
need.
broadcast. 80% is still broadcast.
Yeah, 80% is still broadcast. So the data, I think the broadcasters are having to wake up that they need to have a B2C relationship, you know, with the customer. Actually, who is the customer, as opposed to, oh, we just get some overnights from Barb. You know, they have to actually know who these people are and deal with them the way that the big fangs are doing.
I think it's less to do, though, with the content choices and commissioning. I know that's everyone says, oh, we have great data, so we know what our users like, and so we'll make more of that, which seems like a recipe for disaster for most people, right? Well, where the data really works is in giving them a consumer experience that's so much better. So things like automatic start, you know, start the next episode, or you might like, if it's done well, it doesn't always get done well, would you like this, would you like that, how about this? All that kind of search, navigation, deep curation, personalization, that's strong stuff, and if it's done well, then it actually adds to the positive experience of the consumer on those platforms. And I think there is a big difference between a B2C data proposition like a Netflix and what is still fundamentally a B2B proposition, which is network television.
But by the way, I'm not as skeptical about the algorithm thing, and from a creative point of view, as some. I know it's been a bit cartoonish in the way it's often described, and you're.
But also, they don't tell you enough as a creator. If they told you more.
Well, I do think one of the things that's interesting about it is this notion about not being afraid to embrace the niche, and about if it is true, which I think it is, that they're sort of saying, look, here's what people watch, and if they like that, they like this. That notion, because the other end of the spectrum, which we're much more used to, which is, you know, what we deal with day in, day out, is what are you looking for? Well, we want something that people like. Yeah. You know, by the way, I mean, if you're a what else are you going to say? We want to hit. Any clues?
Good.
Yeah, not baking. Okay. Anything else?
No more zombies.
And at the other end, you've got someone at a computer when that's crazy. But I do think that notion of, well, actually, here's what people are looking at. Here's what people are interested in. They may be a small group, but they're really into it. Yeah. I think creatively that's quite liberating, right?
I saw a page once from a very big, unnamed management consultancy, not a tiny, perfectly formed one. And this page was as complicated as my Venn diagram. And it was so
cannot be true.
So complicated, and I looked at it, and it was on behalf of a major broadcaster by another company. I thought, this is terrific. I mean, it's got data and things and, you know, circles. And then I realized, after I went through all of that and deciphered the slide, what it was actually advising this big commercial broadcasters. They should make more of the stuff that people watch and less of what they don't watch.
There you go. That's why they were big and you were small.
And they got a very big check.
That's why they get the big bucks.
Yeah, big check.
Which I think is fundamentally why I look, I'm a data guy. I like the data. You know, I made a lot of it in my career. But compared to the big shifts that are going on, I think it's a second order. You know, yeah, great recommendations, engines and all the rest, all very important stuff. But it is slightly table stakes and hygiene, and I think it is second order to the judgment that people make. That looks like a great idea.
Time for one more question.
We're
going to wrap it up. Final one over here. Oh, two hands go. All right, we'll squeeze you both in if you're quick. This one first.
How much do you all think that the advent of 5G rolling out is going to disrupt this even further as a kind of new move? 5G mobile data.
Not much in the next 5 years, because I think 5G's a reasonable way away still.
And the best way to answer that question always is to say to people who bring it up, say to them, what is 5G? Because they won't be able to answer because it doesn't exist. And look, we're still sitting here today in 2017, where 80% of TV 2018, sorry.
And on that note,
we only deal in full year statistics. Yes. And it's 80% broadcast, 12% PVR, 8% video on demand on a television set. And that's after how many years of available IP? And that's the fixed line version with some Wi-Fi in the home, right? So
I'm sort of hoping that 5G will mean I can actually make a mobile telephone call without it breaking.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that
would be good.
Okay, question
That'd
over
be a good start.
Sorry.
Just briefly, what do you think a company like ITV needs to do to survive in this world?
Yeah, sale or scale? That's the question. This is a good question.
Well, they've tried the scale bit. They've bought a lot of production companies. They've gotten pretty big in terms of that. I mean, what are they? The biggest factual producer down in the U.S. now. I mean, they're a pretty big,
Quite possibly, yeah.
big company. But where do they go? I mean, how much bigger can they get? I mean, would be my question. The broadcast business, I think, does have some issues going forward about it's almost an existential crisis, because it's sort of like, okay, what am I going to be? What kind of power am I going to have? And I think what they have to figure out is, we are going to do local much better. We are going to serve our local customers much better. We're going to have to do all the things that we can do to serve our local population much better than these big guys.
But it's going to be a smaller business than it was.
Yeah.
It's going to be a smaller business.
It's going to be a smaller business.
So the ITV companies all got rolled up. It's a centralised London-based company. Does it need to go back into the world and back into into the regions? I mean, how does it do that? How does it serve a local base?
That'll be Carolyn McCall's question. But I think yes, I think probably doing more local news, all kinds of things will make them more localized. That would be my view. I don't think they can just
localized
win.
in terms of sub-regions of the UK, or local as in different from all the stuff that's coming out of America?
Different from all the stuff that's coming out of America. And maybe regional news, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't pay, but the question is, does that somehow make you distinct enough so you can somehow survive? This is...
It's either a much smaller company or someone buys it.
The question is, who's going to be allowed to buy it?
And on that note, I think we've run out of time. I'm going to thank the panel very much for joining us, and thank you all for coming. Thanks very much.